Hi, and welcome to part 5 of the webinar series on the multilingual academic corpus of assignments, writing, and speech, MACOS, by authors Bruna Sommer, Alexei Novikov, Adriana Picaral, and Dr. Shelley Staples. This webinar is the 5th in our series and the 3rd one on the pedagogical materials created using MACOS. Here we are going to share activities focused on lexical grammar for Portuguese classes. This webinar will provide a brief definition of lexical grammar, then discuss why not just vocabulary and grammar, but lexical grammar. Finally, we will share a task focusing on lexical grammar in Portuguese. Before we move on to the task, I would like to remind you on how our instructors are involved in this process. First, they give us access to their classroom to consent students. Then, they provide their pedagogical materials so we can align them with the student productions. Finally, they participate in our workshops for both discussing and creating DDL materials. Lexical grammar is essentially what it sounds like. It is a combination of lexis, or vocabulary, and syntax, or grammar, in a specific pattern. Look at the following examples. This pie is delicious. These blueberries are extremely juicy. In these cases, the syntactic and grammatical pattern is shown by the determiner these, in agreement with singular nouns, in this case pie, whereas the determiner these agrees with nouns in the plural, in this case blueberries. If you watch the Genre Register Awareness webinars, you might remember that we had talked about form, meaning, use mappings. So if we look at the same example from the previous slide, this pie is delicious, and analyze it through the form, meaning, use mapping, we'll see that the grammatical form here is the determiner, then followed by a noun in the singular form, pie. As the Longman grammar explains, there is a strong parallel between types of determiners and pronouns. Pronouns lack the referential content provided by a noun head. In the examples in the bottom, we can see that the determiner is not directly succeeded by the noun pie, or these is not succeeded by the noun blueberries. Therefore, the use of these and these as pronouns depends much more on context for their interpretation than when they are used as determiners. In Portuguese, this differentiation also occurs, and it tends to confuse learners since spelling changes slightly in some cases. This task invites students to recognize patterns in which the determiners todo, toda, todos, todas, and tudo function in Portuguese. By induction, specific questions guide their attention to observe the meaning of todos, for example, as understood by the words that co-occur in the concordance lines. Some of these words are color-coded to facilitate the noticing process. These are two examples of boxes containing the concordance lines with agreement with female singular and male plural, but the scaffolded process can be extended for concordance lines with todo and todas as well. As you can see, differentiating the pronouns todos and tudo from the determiners we saw in the previous slide can be usually confusing for Portuguese students due to minor changes in spelling and function. For this reason, the next step in this task is facilitating pattern recognition by drawing students' attention to the words that come after tudo and todos in these concordance lines. Noticing might be facilitated by the comparison with the examples in the previous slide. In these examples here, we don't find articles and nouns following the words todos and tudo, for example, and that happens clearly in the previous concordance lines. This last step helps students systematize information from the 5 different usage patterns analyzed. Besides explaining the syntactic pattern they observed, Students are invited to include an example from the corpus and also create one with their own words for each of the determiners or pronouns. You can find the complete task presented here in the supplementary materials. The next webinar in our series will be Lexical Grammar for Russian classes, which is part 7.